Hello and welcome to the Wellness Connection podcast. I'm your host, Fiona Kane. Today I have another guest, so I'd like to welcome Michael Coles. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Fiona. How are you this afternoon?
I'm well, thank you. I've just mentioned, just in case we hear it, I'm near a RAF base and there are some, what did you call those planes? Some sort of jet fighter type
It
planes
was an
anyway,
F-111, I think, so it wasn't sort of like,
probably.
that's what it previously called. I don't know what it's called now. I just don't keep track of these things
Yes, yeah,
anymore.
I lost track of them a while ago. But anyway, very loud RAF aircraft practicing around here. So if you hear some sort of loud thunder type sounds, that's what it is. I apologise in advance. But and it's 40 degrees here in I'm in Sydney, so it's 40 degrees here, or 41 degrees here today. So it's very warm, but I'm inside in the air conditioning, very luckily.
Yes, I've got lovely air conditioning here in Queensland. We get, affected by humidity quite a lot. So, yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm not really good with humidity, unfortunately. So
No. So, Michael, for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about you?
okay, so I'm just about to turn 50, or I have turned 50 by the time the episode will be released. I'm an autistic. I've been living with autism pretty much all my life. I was first diagnosed with PDD-NOS when I was 3 back in 1978. Then
And
I
what
was
is that?
re-diagnosed. So it's
Okay.
pervasive. I can't pronounce the words. I'm really sort of
That's
struggling
all right. So
today.
essentially, is it what they kind of used to diagnose before they knew how to diagnose
Yes,
autism?
yeah,
Is
so
it just like language
basal
or
developmental disorder not of otherwise specified. So basically, they didn't have a name for it as yet.
okay, yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. I just thought people won't know would have heard of that, so I just thought it's best to
No,
say
no, it's
that.
all good. It's all good. It's good for me to explain as well. So,
Yes.
and then I was diagnosed with Aspergers Syndrome back in 2010 when my first wife basically sort of left me after 6 months of marriage, which is not very nice. So, but then sort of like I met my now wife who's been with me like, nearly 11 years now, or 14 years actually together, and now we're 11 years married. But, but I got diagnosed with, autism spectrum disorder again back in 2017. I basically sort of went to my clinical psychologist when one of my sort of managers was trying to bully me and stuff like that. But I don't. But I think because of my autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, as it was particularly sort of known at that particular stage, I just wanted to sort of get some support, and then sort of like I went to my clinical psychologist, and then I got diagnosed. So it was an interesting sort of journey, sort of going from that to now. So, and obviously sort of I only got in the NDIS back in late 2023 after I had a autistic meltdown or autistic burnout episode back in November 2023.
One of the reasons I wanted to speak to you is we were talking about autistic burnout when, you and I were just conversing, earlier, and I suppose there's a few things. So first of all, I know people have heard of autism, but
Mm.
probably just to give us a because people might have heard of it, but they have all various ideas about what it looks like, and obviously there's not one answer for what it looks like. But it would be really interesting just to have a bit of a from your point of view, what is it like living with autism with you in your experience?
So it's basically sort of in relation to stress. I don't handle stress, unfortunately, too well. I used to have like a full time job. Now it's sort of like, I can't handle full time work anymore because basically, sort of, I know my daughter was diagnosed with autism as well because it does actually run in families. So basically, sort of like it's like if I put under sort of severe duress, or basically it's the like stress that I can't handle. Basically, I get panic attacks. Like I can get sort of meltdowns, shutdowns. Sometimes I can get sleepy. Basically in the afternoon if I sort of have a hard day and stuff like that. Tend to get tired about 2 or 3 o'clock, which I desperately need sleep. And I know for a fact that it's sort of like you need to function between 3 and 5 o'clock because you've got parental responsibilities, or work responsibilities and that type of thing. So
Mm,
it's also
yeah.
you can
Okay,
you
so a lot of it's about sort of inability to regulate under stress.
Yeah, and basically you sort of like, you tend to info dump all the type of thing, I do apologize for info dumping and stuff like that because I do tend to sort of like if I express things, if I talk about my favorite subject, I could talk about that for hours. If I sort of talk about something that I just don't really enjoy, that sort of like, it I tend to shut down and not sort of like talk at all. So, I mean, I don't tend to read between the lines too well. Um, I've been bullied a lot because for little to no explanation. So you sort of like they could sort of like, tell if I'm a little bit different, but basically I get bullied for that, which I don't think that's fair. Sometimes I've got selective memory. If I've got a good memory for things I really enjoy, like I have a really good long term memory for like things I really enjoy. But then sort of like I tend to forget and stuff like that. If it's sort of like things have been mentioned recently, and if I sort of like don't have that in a visual form, then I tend to forget as well. So that's why I usually like to have sort of like visual calendars and all that type of thing. So I do have to ask a question sometimes, and sometimes that can get a little bit annoying for some people that sort of like don't understand autism. I can get flustered for no apparent reason. So that could be sort of like, anxieties at play here. When I'm nervous, I can't put coherent sentences together. So I do apologize if I sort of like, if it's, I have been diagnosed with expressive language disorder. I've got mild expressive language disorder and mild to moderate
Yes.
receptive language disorder. So basically, sometimes I can't sort of like
So
speak the
I
thing
assume that that means your ability to either understand what people are saying or maybe communicate with
verbally.
people?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And what you said that you're quite visual in kind of the way in your the way you are. I wonder again, this I don't know if you've seen this movie, but recently I saw a movie with Claire Danes in it,
Mm?
and she was actually playing like a real life person. It's like the story about this woman. Her name is Temple Grandin. Have
Yes,
you
yes,
heard of
she's,
Temple
one of
Grandin or
the, biggest, I think, autism advocates. I think it was probably the first autism advocate that was in the world. So, yeah, so Timble Grandin is, quite a big autism advocate in the States, so
yeah, yeah. So in this film, I mean, I don't know, I I don't know, but I assume it seems like she displays quite well and shows kind of they visualize quite well what this might look like, I suppose. Well, it appears that way to me. It appears like a really good sort of understanding. And what you see in this case is that she's also quite visual, so it's kind of showing it's kind of giving an example of what the visuals might look for like for her in any situation. And so she'll be in a situation and she'll be having all these visuals go through her head, and it's kind of showing you all the information she's processing at the time and trying to have these conversations and like what you were explaining, how she sometimes doesn't read the room well, doesn't understand what's expected of her, that kind of thing. Is
mm.
that
There's sort
yeah?
of like, a playbook. It's like sort of like having a playbook that the neurotypicals have, which we don't actually get. So it's basically sort of like we have to guess what they're actually thinking. And sometimes we can't read what they're thinking. We can't sort of like, we
Yes.
don't have theory of that mind. So that's kind of where we sort of like, have some deficits there. But it's sort of like, if there's people there, other people that sort of like know us and just gets us, then we can sort of blend really well. So,
Yes, yeah. Well, what she was able to do is she worked in the cattle industry, and she was able to change the way that they set up slaughterhouses and those kinds of places because she kind of knew what the cattle would get spooked by. So
mm,
she was able to look at these places as abattoirs and kind of go through and say, okay, the reason the cows are in distress is because there's like a flag over there, or someone's hung a t-shirt over the edge, or there's a dangly thing there, or whatever it is. But she was able to spot all of the things. So the fact that she's living with autism sort of meant that well, she had a lot of challenges socially, but she was really great at kind of zoning in and sort of finding specific problems in that area, and she's made a lot of difference there.
yeah, but I sort of like, the dangers of that, particularly masking. I know sort of like in a lot of I know a lot of people, especially my age, has been forced to basically sort of like, integrate with the rest of the community. So it's sort of like the dangers with masking is basically sort of like how do I just describe it? I think it's basically trying to sort of be not your authentic self. And if you sort of hide your authentic self, it basically leads to a lot of burnout because, you're trying to sort of pretend to be, you're trying to sort of like, you're trying to think about 10 times harder and stuff like that and what to do. And you're trying to sort of act and stuff. So, I mean, sort of like sometimes it comes naturally, but then sometimes it doesn't come naturally, if that makes sense. But sometimes you can't sort of hold that in for like too long. You can only sort of like cope with that up to a certain point, and then sort of like the meltdowns and the shutdowns happen. So
Yeah.
it's I mean, masking is not that great in the bigger sense of things because sort of like you can actually sort of get big meltdowns out of that. So with the neuroaffirming approach, they're trying to sort of encourage people more to be their authentic self.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. So masking would be that thing where you're trying really, really hard to be like everybody else and be in social situations and things. Is that what you mean by masking?
Um, Pretty much in a lot of situations, particularly in terms of employment. I know sort of like, in social situations, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. It all depends on whether they sort of like, they know how to sort of they can sort of be used to you or something like that. So if people are used to you and they can sort of you can basically be your authentic self, it's fine. But it's more sort of like, basically in workplaces or in schools, especially where those accommodations haven't been accounted for. So if you have accommodations accounted for and you sort of like, you can really live a successful life if you have those accommodations in place. If you don't have those accommodations in, then they're basically sort of expecting you to act like a normal person, then it sort of creates a lot of burnout and then sort of exhaustion. You need to sort of sleep more, and then sort of like you only sort of like you haven't got the amount of spoons that you have on a regular basis. So like if you have a sort of like rough night's sleep, which us autistics actually regularly sort of have. So if you don't have a lot of spoons, you don't. I mean, there's sort of like there's things which that can fill your cup, which basically increases the spoons, and also things that can actually sort of take a lot of spoons away. So if you take a lot of spoons away and you have no spoons, then you can't really cope or can't really sort of function.
Okay. Yeah. And you said that you experienced autistic burnout. So can you tell us a little bit of that? Obviously, this is what you're starting to tell us about. Tell us a little bit about that story and what that was like.
Okay, so it started, I think, back in May 2023 when I had sort of like a couple of staff members that actually were really sort of knew about my autism and all that type of thing left. And there was all these sort of like, there's new staff, and then they basically sort of wanted their own sort of like, their own sort of like, sort of like, ways of means of doing things. But the problem was they basically changed a lot of things rather than just one or two things at a time. So, that basically sort of put me into a lot of overwhelm. And basically also I don't tend to sort of take criticism too well. So I was basically criticized by, a number of factors that basically I wasn't even taught about. So there was not a lot, there was only that they taught me some information, but not a lot of information. But they were trying to get me out of that organization. So it sort of felt like you're basically sort of trying your best. You're trying your hardest, but you felt like weren't good enough. So, and you were sort of like, you sort of like you tried to sort of like express your needs and stuff like that, and then you're not listened and all that type of thing, and sort of that sort of you sort of like you had enough at that particular stage when I was sort of like on November 2, 2023. I basically texted my wife and basically said I can't cope with this anymore. And basically, she recommended to go to a GP, but then sort of like, unfortunately, knowing myself, I tried to sort of like, just basically sort of shove it down to one side and just keep going with it. But then by 10 o'clock, I just rang the 13 Health number here in Queensland, and they basically called an ambulance and carted me off to hospital. So that's how severe it got. So, and therefore, sort of like, my GP sort of told me to basically resign from that job because I needed to like get away from that toxic environment.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So it is important to recognize, I suppose, if you if you were talking to someone else now who might be going through a similar experience, what would you say maybe is maybe a warning sign that they could see or experience that could maybe help them get help earlier, make the decision earlier, rather than end up in a situation where they're being carted off to hospital? What, on reflection, is there something, or what would you say?
Um, Probably sort of connect with some Yurkin and stuff like that. When I actually sort of like joined the NDIS and stuff like that back in December 2023, I found out like, with my journey and stuff like that towards burnout or after burnout for like, to a degree, I basically went to like the Queensland Disability Expo, and then I found all these Neurokin and stuff like that basically sort of like, had autism spectrum disorder, but then they were living their best life. So it was good to sort of
Mm.
like connect with those neurokin, and I've actually connected with quite a few neurokin over the years. There's
Oh, so
a
neurokin, is that what you're saying? I was trying to think what that word is you're saying. Neurokin, is that
neurokin,
it?
yes, yeah. There's a group that I actually joined called Neuroaccess, which a good friend of mine, Annie Crow, actually runs. She's actually sort of a really good she's a really good advocate for people with autism spectrum disorder or people with neurodiverse conditions like ADHD and stuff like that. And I know sort of like, people tend to have ADHD, which is a combination of ADHD and autism together. So it's sort of like really good to have sort of that connecting to that neurokin in place. So she's got this really good chat group, and basically where you can connect with other new can sort of like there's like there's support groups, and then like there's a bit there's some live sort of like meetings and all that type of thing where you can sort of like talk and have a thing, and it's really good to sort of be sort of involved with. And I know sort of like a lot of neurodivergent allied health professionals have joined a business called uh, Neurodivergent Business Collective, which runs by Adina Levy. So that's a really good one. That's been that was basically sort of established. There's also another one which is Connect Fest as well. So there's a few sort of like neurodivergent affirming sort of like chat groups which I've actually joined, and I've really enjoyed that. So I've connected with a occupational therapist and a speech therapist as well, which I got diagnosed with receptive language disorder and expressive language disorder. And also obviously I'm seeing my psychologist as well, which is basically sort of like it's put us sort of like, in sort of a report form, what my conditions are and how I could sort of like, work with those needs and stuff like that as well.
Mm. Yes, yeah. So that would be the thing too. If one of the things, I suppose, the outcome of talking to me and having these conversations, I suppose, is to sort of try and get out there that this is a real issue and that
Mm.
there are a lot of people who are living with autism who are very capable of their work. They just need things to be in a certain way, or certain things to be put in place
Yes,
so that
that's
they
accommodations,
can,
and that's sort of like it's really
accommodations, so that they
essential.
can, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
so that they can manage their stress and those kinds of things. So, do you want to talk a bit more about, so if someone's listening and maybe they're an employer or they're in a situation where they're working with someone with autism, what are the things that you might recommend that they would look at?
So I've basically sort of put together a document called Working with Michael. So basically I'm reading sort of off this list now. So basically, I put a list of how I work best. So basically, I work best when I'm not time pressured and can approach tasks in a logical and basically a structured way. So I work best with a lot of structure and a lot of like repetition. So it's good to sort of have sort of like, checklists and stuff like that of working, how to work and stuff like that, and what procedures to put in place. So you need to sort of make sure that the tasks are clear and I know 100% what I'm doing. I don't like it when I'm basically sort of like, there's a lot of like vague instructions. So I like to sort of have sort of like clear instructions so I know exactly what to do. And if it's sort of like if it's put together in a nice sort of easy to read format, that's really good as well. So basically there's where there's no confusion or ambiguity in a task. So you need to have that clearance as well. So
Mhm.
basically, and also I have a fear about doing anything wrong and stuff like that. So I tend to be very guarded in terms of like, I don't want to get into trouble and stuff like that because I tend to get very scared when people like scream at me or shout at me or just, basically sort of like get mad at me for no reason at all. So that's,
Mm.
it's I keep guarded in terms of way. I like to plan my day like to the nth degree. So I use calendars and all that type of thing to make sure that sort of everything's on track and I can keep everything in control. So basically,
Mm.
if there's urgent tasks that are quick to complete, I can do them if there's like I'm allowed a lot of time and stuff like that.
Mhm.
If there's a change in priorities, I like to discuss those just to make sure that we're sort of both on the same page.
Mm.
So if there's a sudden change of process where I've been changed, I like to sort of make sure that everything is covered. So I like to
Mm.
make sure that sort of like, everything is covered from go to woe so we can sort of know what to do and stuff like that. So there's no sort of ambiguity and sort of like, we're sort of all on the same page. I tend to work best when I actually sort of like communicate with people and trying to sort of see how they see it. So I like to sort of see how they sort of approach a task and sort of like, try and find out a way
Mhm.
to sort of see how they see it as well. If I'm subject to a lot of pressure and a lot of changes, I would like to sort of do at least a bit of planning so I could actually sort of make sure that everything's sort of like, the onboarding is a lot better and stuff like that than what I've experienced. So if I get put on the spot and if I have to make a decision straight away, I need to sort of have a lot more time to actually sort of like, deal with that. So I can feel like I'm making the correct decisions. Sometimes it's sort of like, you don't know what's the answer they're wanting and stuff like that. So that's why I
Mm.
struggle in job interviews as well. Because you need to sort of find out what they're actually wanting. But the problem is basically
Yes.
you can't predict what they're wanting. So, yeah, so I get tired from a lot of overwhelm. If there's a meeting suddenly organized, they sort of need to sort of find out what it is about and all that type of thing. So everything is great if there's a lot of planning involved. So if I don't have much planning involved or sort of like, if I sort of like don't know sort of like, the what it's all about, I do tend to get overwhelmed. So if there's something I need to correct, and if I sort of like it, if I find I'm in a lot of trouble, I tend to sort of like overwhelm or if I sort of like, I tend to sort of ruminate on things and stuff like that. So I
Mhm.
tend to, well, it's not that I like to be perfect, but it's sort of like, we've got a perfectionistic tendency which can be problematic as well. So it's and I think also the main problem if my with my autism is transition. So you have to sort of like if you want to go from one task to another, and then you have to go to back to the old task and stuff like that. You forget where you are and stuff like that. So sometimes you sort of like there can be sort of like there's big problems with transitions as well. So and if it's
Okay.
all of a sudden, then sort of like it can be problematic as well.
Yeah, yeah. So it's all about structure and really commit. I mean, honestly, a lot of these things are just they should really be in the workplace anyway. But I talk to people every day about what their workplace is like, and I know that these things are not in the workplace where people have clear instructions. They know what's expected of them, and there's a manual, and the manual's up to date, and this is what you need to do. And I can say this in a kind of judgy way, except I've been an employer myself over the years, and I know I haven't always done that perfectly either. It's
Mm.
easier said than done, but I get what you're saying. And the other thing too, I imagine in this, it would be the chain of command stuff as well. That you'd have to be really clear who you're reporting to and who's making the decisions. Because if you had two or three people giving you a different idea of what needs to be done, I imagine that would be
And
terrible.
yeah, that's the main problem I had was basically I was dealing with about 3 or 4 people at the
Mm,
same time, and they all wanted it done differently and all that type of thing, and sort of like, I was used to that one way, and then basically sort of like, they wanted to do it a different way, which
mm.
kinda didn't make sense to me.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, that's and I think that's one of the biggest things that, in my experience, just in general, is that the clients that I talk to who want to do a good job, really want to do well, really trying their best, and they get uh, lots of mixed information, and like you said, changes and that kind of thing, and just a really poor communication overall, and really poor instructions and all of that sort of stuff. That's stressful for anyone. However, for people who are neurodivergent, obviously that's just way over the top. It's just too much.
Yeah, and that sort of makes people tired and makes people overwhelmed, and then
Mm.
it's not good for their quality of life as well.
Yes. Yeah. But the good thing is that, and I don't know, but I'm guessing that based on what you're saying, that you probably are pretty good if you have a specific task and you know the instructions, you know it well, that you're a really good person to have like focusing or concentrating on certain things
Yeah.
because you've got a ability to focus on it. Would that be true for you?
That is very true as well. So, yeah,
Yeah.
um, my job is basically sort of like a little bit different now. I'm sort of doing sort of more casual work. I've just started a program facilitator role at Empower Autism. So I'm just basically sort of teaching other people how to live their best life with autism. So I'm
Great.
really looking forward to being part of that. I'm also
Yes.
a board member with the Australian Neurodivergent Parents Association. So we're sort
Mhm.
of like, dealing with policy and stuff like that for government and stuff like that. And we're trying to just advocate for other neurodivergent parents that are
Mm.
sort of being let down by the systems and stuff like that. And we're trying to sort of advocate for them. So
Mm.
it's really sort of great to be involved with all these autistic organizations and how to sort
Mm.
of like, how can improve people's lives with autism. So I think sort of having those
Mm.
resources and having connected to those resources and having that neurokin connection as well, I think is so important.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. So, and it's funny that on this podcast, no matter what the topic is that I'm talking about, it often comes back to one of the most important things is connection.
Yes, exactly.
Connection to other people, and also having some sort of team around us of whether it's medical professionals or whoever it is that we need in our on our team to help us, because we can't all do everything and we don't all know everything, and most of us benefit from having support from professionals that know things that that we don't know. So just having a good team, whatever that looks like as well, is really useful.
Yeah, and having that sort of like support is really essential as well, and having the right support. That sort of
Mm.
like they can really sort of like you can be your authentic self with, and you don't have to sort of like hide who you really are.
Mm.
I think sort of it's important to be who you authentically are, and you
Mm.
so you can actually be your full self rather than sort of like trying to be something that you're not.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the good thing is, I suppose, because of people like Temple Grandin and people like you, and people who are out there advocating, we are learning more and more that that's okay. And you sort of sometimes now you'll see certain behaviours of individuals, and you'll kind of go, "Oh, okay, I think I know what's going on here," and it's just them responding to their environment. And so sometimes, yeah, if people who are, well, I think I would be classed as neurotypical, although I must admit, I when you list a lot of the things that you would use to diagnose autism, I tick a lot of those boxes, but I don't tick all of them. So I suspect that all of us are on some sort of spectrum, really, of just how our brains work. That's just how it is. But yeah, but really, when you're talking to the neurotypical people, I suppose it's the big thing is for us just to have a real awareness around,
Mm,
hey, there might be something you're doing in the environment that's actually negatively affecting
mm.
this person who's neurodivergent. Is that something?
Yeah, especially with these sort of like, the environment with workplaces, for example. Like,
Mm.
basically this sort of like, the fluorescent lights, it's not great for autistic people. Like, the open plan offices, for example, that's sort of not really sort of like conducive for a good environment with a person with autism. I like to work from home, so
Mm,
it's good for me because I can sort of focus. Basically, I've got my own environment. I could sort of like I can control the environment, and basically
mm,
sort of have it to whatever needs I actually sort of want. So it's
yeah,
sort of like it's great to sort of like you want to make sure that your environment is good for you as well. So I think it's sort
mm,
of like people I think people on the autism spectrum do well with self-employment as well because they can control that environment and they can
yes,
control their sort of like, they can sort of be conducive to where their, their appointments and all that type of thing. And also, you could have a parent of a person with autism as well. So usually it runs in families. So sometimes you have to sort of like, attend their appointments and stuff like that. So you're trying to sort of like, being an autistic parent and also being a person with autism can have a lot of challenges as well. But if people can put the right accommodations in place, I
mm,
think it's a good thing. I might have to sort of like, mention that the National Autism Strategy has just been released. So I'm hoping with some of those, there's some really good sort of like, things that's going to be implemented with the National Autism Strategy. So hopefully they will encourage sort of more sort of like, encourage like people with autism can live their best life through that strategy as well. So
mm,
hopefully with some of those strategies it will work really well, but there can be a couple of limitations as well. So um obviously I've created a podcast called the Deep Dive Podcast in June last year where I basically sort of talk to a lot of autistic people and a lot of neurodivergent people and some disabled people about sort of living their best life with what they've got and stuff like that as well. And they're sort of creating their own spaces and their own sort of like, really sort of, you know, um, creative spaces and stuff like that, which are really succeeding with. So
mm,
I've been really passionate in terms of like creating this podcast to be able to sort of like, visualize those ideas and stuff like that in place.
mm,
So that's the main reason why I created the podcast is so basically people can with autistic so sorry, I'm losing my track of thought here. I do apologize.
it's okay.
Um, Sometimes, they can live their best autistic life, and we can sort of like profile these people that are living their best autistic life, and then they sort of like, we can
Mm,
sort of like make that visual to other people and stuff like that. And then there's sort of like, tools and tricks and all that type of thing, which they've created pretty much
yeah,
by themselves, which I think it's really, really good. So yeah, so I think one
mm,
is understanding Zoe, which I'll have one of the episodes in season 2, which is starting on the 5th of February. So yeah,
mhm,
so I've got fortnightly episodes, but that's one of them that's coming up in February. So I think you'll be really keen to find out about understanding Zoe. So she actually sort of like the person I've interviewed started her from scratch, and it's a really good sort of AI tool that you can actually use to sort of help with basically sort of caring for your autistic child.
oh, okay, well, that sounds really good. Yes. So that's an episode because this our episode will probably come out, might come out just a bit after that. It'll be mid-February or something. This episode will come out. So by the time this is released, that episode of yours will be out already. Is
Yeah,
that right?
yeah, sounds about
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And they're looking for remind us what the podcast is called. The Deep Dive podcast,
It's
is
called
it?
the Deep Dive Podcast, so you can access it at this website, www.deepdiveau.net. You can actually sort of like log on to our Instagram page or TikTok page at the Deep Dive AU. So you can log on through our Instagram or TikTok page, or you can go to our LinkedIn, which is the Deep Dive Podcast. Our Facebook, just search the Deep Dive Podcast, you can find it there. And you can also sort of like go to our YouTube page where you can sort of view all our videos at the Deep Dive AU as well.
Great, great. And I'll put all of those links into the show notes as well. Look, before we finish up, I just wanted to say to you as well a couple of things. One, if the things that you were talking about before, essentially, it would be great if people who are living with autism do learn how to advocate for themselves and how to ask for what they need. But on the other side of things, if I know that I'm working with someone who's living with autism, is it reasonable for me to say to them, "Hey, look, I know that you're having some challenges or that you might have some challenges here. Is there anything I can do to help you or support you?" Would that be okay, or would that be
That would be
considered,
okay, and also you can put them in, like the direction of there's a helpline called Autism Connect, which is run by a organisation called Amaze in Victoria.
Mhm.
There is a 1300 number which I'll sort of like put in the show notes. I'll email that to you.
Sure.
But there is a really good Autism Connect service which is run by Maze, and they can sort of help you with whatever questions you need, whatever referrals and stuff like that. And there's also sort of like it can be really accessible and stuff like that through the chatbots, and also sort of like there's a phone number as well, and they've got email support as well. So that's probably the best that's probably the best sort of like starting point you can actually sort of work through. Um, if it wasn't for Autism Peer Assist, which is actually through Autism Connect, I wouldn't have been able to go on the NDIS. So I think sort of like having that sort of assistance and that help is
Mm.
really appreciated. I know
Yes.
there's another sort of organization which deals with women on the spectrum called Yellow Ladybugs. So that's
Mhm.
another organization where they have their own conference and stuff like that on a yearly basis. It's very neuroaffirming as well. So, and they've got a lot of resources and stuff like that for autistic girls as well. So, they're probably sort of two sort of organisations which I'll probably put that in the direction for. You
Mm.
can also sort of go to your autism organisation in your state as well. So that's probably a good
Mm.
resource to go through as well.
And I'm sure I do have a fair few international listeners, but I'm sure they've got different variations of this wherever they are, so they could Google those as well. But they could certainly look at some of the Australian websites and things, I assume.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. No, it's really good. The sort of like, the information is really evolving, and I know for a fact that sort of like, there's sort of learning things all the time. And I know
Mm.
there's a lot of neuroaffirming people in this space that are really sort of like passionate about what they're trying to sort of do. So I think it's
Mm.
really, really good to sort of have those people in that sort of space to be able to sort of help people with autism.
Yeah, 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 exactly. People who know what people who live it, who know it, who can really help others, which is what you're doing as well. So I really admire that you're doing the same thing. You're kind of saying, "Okay, I've had these challenges, and but what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead the way and maybe shine a light on some of these issues and point people in the direction for support and services that they need." So that's well done you.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like it's really sort of helpful to have those resources into place. I've had to sort of find these all myself, so it's better to sort of have those, people, so like, you want to make sure that sort of like, the people get the right information, not get a lot of
Mm.
misinformation about. So if you get the right information, you can actually live your best life. So it's really good to sort of like, be sort of like, taken in the right direction, have those resources on hand so
Mm.
you can actually sort of like, succeed and thrive.
Yes, yeah, which is the whole point, and so I'm really glad that you're doing that. And happily, like I said to everyone, the show notes will have all of the links, and they can go out and check out your podcast. And I think you've got a mug there as well, haven't you,
Yep,
for
yep, yeah. So
your
basically,
podcast?
I can sort of this is the deep dive mug. You can buy through our merchandise page at our website www.deepdiveau.net. I
Yes.
think I really like this one, so I actually sort of
Yes.
rebranded this last year. So it's got our links and stuff like that, and so you can sort of have that on your desk, and you can have that as a sort of like it's a conversation starter. That's for sure.
Yes, yes, I've got mug envy because I don't have any merch or anything for my podcast. So I'm looking at your podcast. So anyone who's listening to this, you have to check out YouTube or Rumble the video, and you can have a look. It's quite a cool mug there that you can purchase.
You can also purchase also stickers and also um, like a I was trying to think stubby holder as well. So
Okay.
I've diversified. So it's not just mugs you can actually buy. You can actually buy a couple of things as well.
Okay. Well done. Yeah, I haven't even gone there yet. So yes, bit of merch envy.
Yeah, and I'm also looking for sponsorships and collabs to sort of work out so because I'm self-funding the podcast at the moment, but I'm trying to sort of get that sort of
Yes.
like, the cost back in terms of sponsorship and collaboration, so please contact
Mm.
me if you want to have a, sponsorship or collaboration.
Yes, yes, definitely contact Michael. And look, Michael, before we finish up, is there anything that you feel that I've missed that we really should, that you want information or anything that you feel you need to say before we finish up, or you feel like
I
we've
think we've
covered it
covered
and it's all
everything,
good?
I'm pretty sure we have.
Yes, yeah, great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you, Fiona, thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone at home who's listening and watching. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I learn so much when I do this podcast. That's what I really love, talking to people and talking to people who have different experiences in life to me, and different advice and information and all of those contacts and things that are available that I didn't know about. Like I said, I'll put them in the show notes. But please like, subscribe, share, rate, all of those things. Really appreciate it. I like to have real conversations about things that matter here on the Wellness Connection podcast. So thanks for your time today, and I'll see you all again next week. Thanks. Bye bye.